In March of 1943, Norfolk Naval Base hummed with purpose. The waters off Virginia held the future of naval warfare, though nobody quite realized it yet. Captain Giles Short stood aboard the USS Bogue, turning over the encrypted message in his hands. The words came from the 10th Fleet, and they changed everything. Ultra-intelligence had cracked the German codes. Those decrypted transmissions revealed something stunning: the exact locations where U-boats planned to meet up and refuel. The milk cows, submarines U-459 and U-487 had their rendezvous points mapped out. The wolf packs prowling the convoy routes would be expecting supplies at precise coordinates. The operations officer reached for the secure telephone and set events in motion that would reshape the war at sea. It was a simple concept, really. 1 escort carrier, 4 destroyer escorts. That's all they were sending. The USS Bogue would lead the charge, supported by the USS Belknap, USS George E. Badger, USS Osmond Ingram, and USS Clemson, 5 ships against an enemy that had dominated the Atlantic for years. What none of them could have imagined was how completely this single mission would overturn everything the Germans believed about submarine warfare. 8 months ahead, American hunter-killer groups would shatter the myth that U-boats were unstoppable. Within that time frame, Admiral Karl Dönitz would have no choice but to pull his entire submarine fleet from the Atlantic. The war beneath the waves had always been about numbers, brutal mathematics that decided who lived and who died. Tonnage was the scoreboard. Sink more than your enemy could replace, and you won. Lose submarines faster than new ones rolled off the construction ways, and you lost. The Germans had written those rules themselves, and they'd been winning that game handily. In March, their wolf packs sent more than 80 ships to the bottom. Nearly 500,000 tons of cargo went down with them. April would be even worse. The losses would climb beyond 600,000 tons. That was the peak of the German offensive, the high water mark of their power. The math seemed to favor Berlin. 20 new U-boats slipped into service every month. Meanwhile, they were losing fewer than 10. From his headquarters in France, Admiral Karl Dönitz commanded over 400 submarines. His Wolfpack tactics had nearly strangled the lifeline connecting America to Britain. Convoy SC-121 and HX-229 had been torn apart. Churchill himself later admitted that the U-boat threat was the only thing that truly frightened him throughout the entire war. The USS Bogue herself was formidable. She displaced 9,800 tons and carried 890 men. Her flight deck stretched nearly 500 feet. From that deck flew 12 F-4F Wildcat fighters and 9 TBF Avenger torpedo bombers. But the real power lay in technologies the Germans hadn't yet comprehended. She carried centimeter-wave radar that German detection equipment couldn't even see. She had high-frequency direction-finding gear that could pinpoint U-boat radio transmissions with lethal precision. And tucked inside those Avenger bomb bays sat something disguised as a Mark 24 mine, though everyone knew it was actually the Fido acoustic homing torpedo, a weapon that hunted sound itself. The hunter-killer concept changed everything about submarine warfare. Traditional escorts protecting convoys had to choose: pursue a submarine or protect merchant ships. They couldn't do both. Hunter-killer groups had no such burden. Their only job was finding U-boats and destroying them, wherever the ocean took them. Lieutenant Commander Howard Avery would command Composite Squadron 9 aboard the Bogue. Years of Atlantic convoy operations had taught him something crucial about submarines. They were vulnerable at specific moments. When they surfaced to charge their batteries, when they met supply submarines for fuel and torpedoes, when they radioed reports back to headquarters. German submarine doctrine demanded constant communication. Position reports every single day, contact reports the moment they spotted convoys. Weather observations twice daily, damage assessments after every attack. Each radio transmission was a gamble. Each one revealed their location to Allied direction-finding stations listening across the Atlantic. Aboard U-569, Captain Lieutenant Hans Johansson studied his orders. 7 weeks at sea had drained his fuel reserves dangerously low. Radio instructions told him to meet the milk cow U-459 at coordinates 50 degrees 40 minutes north, 35 degrees 21 minutes west. Johansen had taken command of the boat in early 1943, replacing Hans-Peter Hinch, who'd led her through earlier patrols. U-569 was a Type CIC submarine, the workhorse of the German fleet. She displaced 769 tons on the surface and 871 tons when submerged. 14 torpedoes filled her tubes. 44 men made up her crew. That single merchant ship she'd sunk, plus one damaged vessel, reflected a harsh truth. The Atlantic was becoming increasingly deadly for submarines, but U-569 faced the same fundamental weakness that had plagued submarines since the First World War. Diesel engines couldn't run underwater, they needed air. Those electric batteries required hours of surface charging to restore their power. A Type CIC could stay submerged for 18 hours if the captain took it easy with the electric motors. Push for speed, though, and those batteries drained in under an hour. American hunter-killer groups understood these weaknesses perfectly. They designed their search patterns to maximize radar coverage. They timed their aircraft patrols to catch submarines on the surface. They developed attack protocols that kept pressure on relentlessly until batteries ran dry. On May 22, 1943, at 14:20 hours, an Avenger pilot named Lieutenant William Chamberlain spotted something on his radar. A surface contact, range 18 miles, bearing 90 degrees. He shoved the control stick forward and began his dive toward the target. U-569 was running on the surface at 15 knots. The diesels were working hard, pumping power back into batteries that the long evasion through the night had exhausted. The bridge watch saw the aircraft coming in at 8 miles. Alarm bells screamed through the boat. Johansen ordered an emergency dive. The procedures had been drilled 1,000 times, 35 seconds from alarm to periscope depth. Ballast tank vents opened, diesel engines stopped cold, electric motors whined to life, the submarine's bow tilted sharply downward, tons of seawater rushed into the tanks. Chamberlain's depth charges caught U-569 at shallow depth. 4 Mark 17 charges set for shallow detonation. The explosions ripped through the boat, tearing at her hull. She was forced back to the surface, damaged and dying. Another Avenger, piloted by Howard Roberts, was already in position when U-569 broke the surface. Roberts opened fire immediately, then he saw white flags on the submarine's periscope. The crew was surrendering. The Canadian destroyer HMCS Saint Laurent was vectored toward the scene. As she approached, Johansen ordered the boat scuttled. The crew abandoned ship into the Atlantic. 25 men from U-569's crew survived. 19 went down with their boat. The survivors told American interrogators something shocking. The American pilots knew exactly where they were. It was like watching through the ocean itself, one German sailor said. They appeared from nowhere with perfect accuracy. What those captured submariners didn't fully understand was that ultra-intelligence had revealed far more than just single submarine positions. Cryptanalysts working at Bletchley Park had decoded the entire German naval grid system. Patrol areas, Wolfpack assembly points, supply rendezvous coordinates. Every U-boat floating on the Atlantic was potentially exposed. On June 5th, USS Boge's aircraft found U-217 on the surface 450 miles west of the Azores. She was charging batteries when they spotted her. Captain Lieutenant Kurt Reichenbach-Klinker commanded the boat through 3 patrols. He'd sunk 3 ships totaling 10,651 tons. The Avengers from Bogue attacked at dawn, catching U-217 in those vulnerable seconds before she could dive. The first depth charges damaged the diving mechanism. Unable to submerge, Reichenbach-Klinker ordered his gun crews to engage the attacking aircraft. Damage control teams worked desperately trying to repair the diving planes. The surface battle lasted 18 minutes. U-217's 88mm deck gun and 20mm anti-aircraft weapons threw over 300 rounds skyward. One Wildcat took minor damage from shell fragments. But U-217 was fighting an impossible fight against aircraft built specifically to hunt submarines. An Avenger from Bogue Squadron delivered the final blow. Depth charges bracketed the submarine perfectly. The explosions tore U-217's pressure hull open in multiple places. The submarine sank with all 50 hands, including Reichenbach Klinker. Only the oil slick marked where she went down. The impact on U-boat crews was immediate and profound. Radio intercepts picked up growing fear among submarine commanders about American weapons that seemed to find them no matter what they did. Morale reports described crews becoming terrified of surfacing, even for the essential battery charging that kept them alive. Admiral Dönitz tried tactical changes. U-boats would transit the Bay of Biscay submerged, draining batteries regardless. Surface refueling would happen only at night. Radio transmissions would be cut to absolute minimums. But these measures only delayed what was already inevitable. America had momentum and technology that German tactics could never overcome. By June 1943, 5 hunter-killer groups prowled the Atlantic. Each was centered on an escort carrier with destroyer screens. USS Bogue, USS Card, USS Core, USS Sante, and USS Croatan represented industrial capacity Germany could never match. The USS Card, commanded by Captain Arnold J. Isbell, would become legendary. Between July and October 1943, Card's group would sink 8 U-boats confirmed. The ship earned the first presidential unit citation ever awarded to a hunter-killer group. The methods Card's team developed became standard doctrine across the entire fleet. Aircraft would patrol in expanding box patterns from the carrier. Any surface radar contact triggered immediate attack. Submarines that crashed-dived were marked with dye, then hunted by destroyers armed with hedgehog mortars and depth charges. On August 7, 1943, Card's aircraft located Milk Cow U-117 on the surface. U-66 was refueling from her, fuel hoses still connected, crash diving impossible. Lieutenant Charles Stapler's Avenger went in immediately, dropping 4 depth charges right alongside U-117. The explosion ignited over 400 tons of diesel fuel. The pillar of fire rose so high it could be seen from 30 miles away. U-66 managed to crash dive, but took damage from the blast. She would survive this day, only to meet her end 9 months later in one of the war's strangest engagements. Captain Lieutenant Klaus Barkston, commanding U-521, watched U-117's destruction from periscope depth. His war diary captured the despair spreading through the submarine fleet. The Americans appear everywhere at once. Their aircraft arrive without warning. Their weapons strike with impossible accuracy. We are no longer hunters. We have become the hunted. October 1943 became the turning point. The U-boat fleet lost 23 submarines that month. Several were commanded by veteran officers who'd survived since 1939. Each loss meant irreplaceable experience, disappeared forever. Training schools couldn't manufacture that kind of knowledge. The loss of Milk Cow submarines proved catastrophic. U-488, U-489, and U-490 sank within weeks of each other. Without refueling capability, Type CIC boats couldn't reach the American coast anymore. Their patrol areas shrank to the mid-Atlantic, where hunter-killer groups gathered in growing numbers. USS Core's hunter-killer group perfected continuous air coverage. Aircraft stayed over suspected U-boat zones for days without break. The endless pursuit exhausted submarine batteries. It worked devastatingly well, even against experienced commanders. On October 13, 1943, Core's group caught U-378 at dawn. The submarine's commander, Oberleutnant Erich Marder, had just turned 26. The young commander's inexperience became painfully obvious when those aircraft came roaring in. Instead of doing what any seasoned U-boat skipper would do, taking the boat down immediately, he tried to fight it out on the surface. 4 American Wildcats came screaming in from different angles, raking the submarine with machine gun fire, while 2 Avengers lined up for depth charge runs. The anti-aircraft gunners managed to put some bullets into one of the Wildcats, but machine gun rounds swept across the conning tower and they were torn from their positions before they could do any real damage. When Marder gave the order to dive, the depth charges were already thundering down. They hit with shocking force, shattering the pressure hull like it was made of glass. By the time the crew got the boat back to the surface, only 1 man was pulled alive from the freezing water. Experienced U-boat veterans who'd seen plenty of brutal action were genuinely shaken by how ruthlessly these new hunter-killer teams operated. A man named Heinrich Bleichrodt held the rank of corvette captain and was considered one of Germany's finest submarine commanders. 24 confirmed ships sent to the bottom. Yet even he could barely escape when USS Block Island's aircraft caught his boat in October 1943. His submarine, U-109, managed to limp back to port, but she was torn up badly. Bleichrodt never took another boat to sea. He sat with fellow officers afterward and told them something that stuck with everyone. The Atlantic has become a slaughterhouse. As autumn turned toward winter, the Americans introduced equipment that changed everything. They deployed the MAD system, a magnetic anomaly detector that could pick up submerged U-boats operating in shallow water. They started dropping acoustic buoys in organized patterns that could track a submarine's movements for hours at a time. The technological advantage was becoming so steep that it seemed almost impossible to overcome. A submarine commander named Rolf Heinrich Hoppmann held the rank of captain lieutenant and had successfully completed 7 war patrols commanding U-405. His tactical knowledge and years of experience had kept his crew alive through situations that had destroyed other boats. He'd learned techniques for disappearing, using clouds and rain squalls to mask his submarine's position from enemy aircraft. But on October 31, 1943, when U-405 was sailing with Wolfpack Seaweed, nothing would protect him. USS Card's hunter-killer group appeared in their patrol zone, and the destroyer USS Bory picked up a radar contact at 2100 hours, about 6,500 yards away. What happened next would be remembered as one of the most extraordinary naval engagements of the entire war. Hoppmann ordered a crash dive, but the depth charges coming down forced him back up. With his boat damaged and unable to submerge again, he made a decision that showed either tremendous courage or complete desperation. He would stay on the surface and fight. The two vessels came together in the darkness and rough seas with a terrible grinding crunch. The Bory's bow rode up onto U-405's main deck. For several minutes they were locked together, and what followed was absolute chaos. Men fired rifles and pistols, threw hand grenades at point-blank range. American sailors hurled coffee mugs, brass shell casings, and anything else they could grab at the German gunners. It was surreal, brutal and close and completely unexpected in a naval war that had always been about distance and technology. When the ships finally separated, the captain of the Bory, Lieutenant Commander Charles Hutchins, ordered his entire arsenal brought to bear. Over 4,000 rounds poured from his guns into the stricken U-boat. U-405's conning tower was shredded with holes, her deck gun was destroyed, and her hull had been punctured multiple times below the waterline. Hoppmann knew it was finished. He ordered the crew to abandon ship. Only 8 of the 49 men aboard survived the brutal cold Atlantic water. Hoppmann was not among them, and the Bory herself had been damaged so severely that she would be deliberately sunk the very next day. That engagement sent a message that reverberated through the entire U-boat force. Even the most accomplished commanders could no longer survive against these coordinated hunter-killer attacks. The Americans didn't just have better weapons. They had developed something more fundamental. They'd brought scientific thinking to submarine warfare. Operations research scientists had created optimal search patterns based on mathematical probability theory. They could listen to a U-boat's engines and identify it by the unique signature of its propellers. Statistical models let them predict where U-boats would go. But the most devastating tool of all was high-frequency direction finding. German submarine captains had to send regular radio messages to coordinate Wolfpack attacks. Those transmissions took only a few seconds, but that was more than enough time for Allied stations scattered across the Atlantic in places like Bermuda and the Azores to triangulate a position down to within 2 miles. Commanders faced an awful choice: stay silent and lose the ability to coordinate attacks, or transmit and let the enemy know exactly where you are. The Germans were confident their Enigma encryption was unbreakable. They had no way of knowing that captured codebooks taken from U-559 back in October 1942 had allowed British cryptanalysts to crack the 4-rotor M4 cipher. Admiral Donitz's operational orders were being read by Allied intelligence within hours of being sent. That December brought the destruction of several veteran U-boats that had been operating since the war began. U-172 was commanded by Captain Lieutenant Hermann Hoffmann and had sent 26 ships to the bottom, over 150,000 tons of shipping. Her crew was experienced and had developed sophisticated tactics for breaking through escort screens. On December 13th, USS Bogue's hunter-killer group located U-172 in the middle of the Atlantic. The submarine had just transmitted a weather report, and direction-finding stations had pinpointed her position. The first attack came from an Avenger piloted by Lieutenant Junior Grade William Fowler, dropping a Fido homing torpedo. U-172's acoustic operator heard it coming in time to start evasive maneuvers, but that meant running at high speed and draining the batteries at an alarming rate. Within 2 hours, 3 more aircraft showed up to keep watch. For the next 14 hours, U-172 played a desperate survival game. Surface for a few minutes to suck in air and recharge, then crash dive when the radar warning went off. But by 800 the next morning, the batteries were exhausted and compressed air was almost gone. Hoffmann had no choice. He had to surface and stay there. The anti-aircraft guns blazed away at the circling aircraft while the repair crews did what they could, but there was no hope. The gun battle lasted 43 minutes. 4 destroyer escorts, USS George E. Badger, USS Clemson, USS DuPont, and USS Osmond Ingram, closed in and opened fire with their main batteries. Over 400 rounds slammed into U-172 from point-blank range. Her hull was punctured 17 times. When she finally went down, 46 of her 57 crew members were lost. Only 13 survivors were pulled from the water, and during interrogation, they spoke about the despair that had become routine. "The ocean has become a trap," one of them said. "We cannot hide, we cannot run, we cannot fight effectively. Every patrol is expected to be our last." By early 1944, the transformation was complete. The U-boat force that had nearly strangled Britain into submission was now being systematically hunted down and destroyed. In January, they lost 19 boats. February took 20 more. March, another 23. The numbers just kept climbing, relentless and accelerating. The Germans were sending increasingly young and inexperienced commanders out to sea with almost no training. A 23-year-old named Wolfgang Harder, commanding U-434, had less than 6 months of submarine experience when American aircraft caught his boat on the surface in March 1944. He ordered his crew to fight rather than dive, a choice that cost every single life aboard. The gap between American and German capabilities just kept widening. American pilots were accumulating hundreds and hundreds of hours of anti-submarine patrol experience. Radar operators had learned to read their screens and distinguish a submarine from the background noise and sea clutter. Acoustic specialists could identify individual boats by their propeller signatures and track specific submarines across thousands of miles of ocean. German submarine crews, by contrast, were becoming younger and less experienced. The average age of commanders had dropped from 32 down to 26. The senior petty officers, who'd always been the real foundation of submarine operations, were increasingly hard to find. Crews were going to sea with men who'd never seen combat before, led by officers who'd gone through abbreviated training courses. Admiral Dönitz had a son named Peter who personified this terrible trend. The younger Dönitz was a watch officer aboard U-954, and on May 19, 1943, the boat was caught on the surface by British escorts. Everyone died, including young Peter. The Admiral didn't let that stop him from sending more young men to their probable deaths, but it was a personal reminder of the cost. Spring 1944 brought yet another American innovation that made submarine warfare almost suicidal. Hunter-killer aircraft now had centimetric radar that worked at night. Lee light searchlights turned the darkness into daylight, illuminating surface submarines from miles away. Even the best commanders couldn't escape detection anymore. On May 6, 1944, USS Buckley found U-66 on the surface west of the Cape Verde Islands. The submarine's commander, Oberleutnant Gerhard Seehausen, had completed 9 war patrols and sunk 33 ships. None of that mattered. His batteries were nearly dead, so he couldn't dive. he decided to ram the Buckley instead. The two ships hit each other at 15 knots, their hulls grinding together. German and American sailors fired rifles at each other from meters away. Men threw coffee mugs, shell casings, and hand grenades back and forth. Lieutenant Commander Brent Abel's crew fired over 100 shells, nearly 3,000 rounds of 20mm ammunition, and more than 400 rounds of 40mm shells in just 16 minutes. U-66 went down with 24 of her 48 crew members. That kind of close-quarters combat was the death throes of an era when submarines could fight on the surface as raiders. The real proof of American mastery came on June 4, 1944, when Captain Daniel Gallery's hunter-killer group from USS Guadalcanal captured U-505. A boarding party from destroyer escort USS Pillsbury scrambled down through the conning tower while seawater was still pouring in. They closed the damaged valves, stopped the flooding, and saved the submarine. They found codebooks, cipher machines, acoustic torpedoes, all kinds of technical manuals. But the real significance was symbolic. U-boats were no longer terrifying predators. They were prizes. Their crews were prisoners, not warriors. When the invasion of France began in June, hunter-killer groups moved into the Bay of Biscay, hunting submarines, trying to attack the invasion fleet. The confined waters became a death trap. 15 U-boats were destroyed in just the first week of June. Survivors talked about being attacked by dozens of aircraft at once, with no way to escape. Captain Lieutenant Herbert Verne was one of the few U-boat commanders who made it through the war. He described what it was like. We would detect aircraft on our radar, crash dive, and within minutes hear sonar buoys splashing down around us. Then the escort ships would show up and just sit there, maintaining contact day after day. We'd surface desperate for air and find aircraft already waiting for us. It was systematic extermination. By August, Dönitz ordered the evacuation of the French bases as Allied armies pushed forward. U-boats attempting to reach Norwegian ports faced constant attack from hunter-killer groups strung out along the entire route. Out of 31 boats that tried, 11 were destroyed. The ones that made it arrived with massive damage and exhausted crews. The Schnorchel breathing tube was introduced, allowing submarines to run their diesel engines while submerged at periscope depth. But it came too late and was never adequate. Schnorchel boats could still be detected by radar and only managed 6 knots while using the device. It was a desperate defensive measure, not a return to real offensive power. September 1944 saw the deployment of the most advanced hunter-killer technology yet developed. The Mark 24 Fido torpedo had been improved with greater range and sensitivity. New Hedgehog mortars could saturate an entire area with contact-fused projectiles. The radar sets mounted on these escort carriers could pick up a submarine's periscope from 5 miles away. The technological gap had grown insurmountable. Fregattenkapitan Gunther Kuhnke stood on the bridge of U-10, commanding a wolf pack that was being methodically torn apart. In a single October night in 1944, he watched 3 of his fellow submarines get destroyed, their hulls ripped open and sent to the bottom. His war diary captured the desperation seeping through the ranks. The enemy possesses capabilities we simply cannot match. They strike without any warning, with devastating accuracy. We are no longer fighting against other men, but against machines that never tire, never miss, never show mercy. The final months of 1944 brought catastrophic losses. November saw 24 boats destroyed. December claimed 27 more. The casualty figures kept climbing with each passing week. New submarines rolling off the assembly lines couldn't replace what was being lost at sea. Construction facilities themselves had been bombed into rubble, and fuel reserves were running desperately low. The entire U-boat force was bleeding out, and every officer knew it. Yet leadership continued ordering boats into the Atlantic. Driven by Hitler's refusal to accept reality and demands that kept coming down the chain of command. Teenagers barely old enough to shave received commands of submarines following nothing more than rushed training courses. Crews embarked on voyages that would be both their first and their last patrol. The hunter-killer groups had transformed the Atlantic into a graveyard. U-396 became emblematic of this final devastating chapter. Her commanding officer, Oberleutnant Zorsee Ernst Gunther Unterhorst, was just 22 years old when he took command. His crew averaged 20 years of age. They departed from Norway in November 1944, and USS Corps' hunter-killer group found them within 72 hours. The chase went on for 18 brutal hours before the exhausted submarine had no choice but to surface. Batteries completely drained, the air inside foul and unusable. The moment she broke the surface, waiting aircraft struck with lethal precision. U-396 went down with all hands. Starting in late 1944, the Germans deployed Type 21 submarines equipped with snorkel technology, machines that could travel at 16 knots underwater and carried advanced detection equipment. Yet only 2 of these advanced boats became operational before everything collapsed. The hunter-killer groups won their race against German innovation by sheer overwhelming force and systematic elimination of every existing U-boat at sea. The numbers painted a devastating picture of Germany's collapse. During 1942, U-boats had sent 1,160 Allied vessels to the bottom, vessels carrying 6.2 million tons of cargo. By 1944, they managed to sink just 132 ships, totaling 773,000 tons of tonnage. The hunter-killer groups had devastated German submarine effectiveness by roughly 90%. Meanwhile, American factories were launching over 140 Liberty ships each month, 3 new cargo vessels arriving every 2 days, each one capable of carrying 10,000 tons of supplies and equipment. Germany faced an equation that no amount of courage could solve. By March 1945, the U-boat fleet existed mostly on paper, with phantom numbers. Of 463 submarines supposedly available, fewer than 60 could actually operate. The rest sat uselessly in harbors, starved of fuel, lacking torpedoes, or crewed by men who'd never fought before. Any boat that managed to put to sea faced guaranteed destruction from hunter-killer groups, now operating with the expertise that comes from nearly 2 years of relentless combat experience. The final indignity arrived in April 1945, when U-546 attacked USS Frederick C. Davis, which was part of USS Bug's protective screen. The destroyer escort went under, but U-546 was tracked down and sunk by the surviving escorts within hours. It would be the last submarine destroyed by Bug's group, bringing their personal tally to 13 boats. Admiral Donitz wrote his final diary entry on submarine operations with unmistakable bitterness. The enemy's dominance at sea, most particularly in technological and scientific advancement, has stripped from our grasp the single weapon that could have changed everything. The submarine war is finished. We have lost. The transformation had unfolded in less than 24 months. March 1943 found U-boats threatening to break the Atlantic supply chain, sinking merchant ships faster than the Allies could build replacements. By March 1945, the U-boat force had been rendered extinct, its last surviving boats huddled in ports or being systematically executed on the open ocean. The hunter-killer groups accomplished this reversal by methodically applying superior technology, signals intelligence, and industrial output. They converted submarine hunting from something requiring intuition and blind luck into an exact science built on precision and steady effort. Every single component of anti-submarine tactics had been perfected through mathematical study and real-world testing and refinement. USS Bug finished the war as the most prolific hunter-killer group, having confirmed 13 U-boat kills. USS Card achieved 11 victories. USS Corps destroyed 6 submarines. These small escort carriers and their accompanying destroyers had sunk more submarines than traditional battleships could have accomplished. Yet their genuine accomplishment lay not in the quantity of kills, but in demonstrating a completely new methodology. They showed the world that contemporary warfare belonged to nations capable of fusing signals intelligence, advanced technology, and industrial manufacturing into seamless combat systems. Individual valor and ability, though still valuable, could not overcome systematic disadvantage. The romantic period of submarine warfare, when a gifted captain could overcome being outnumbered through clever tactics and sheer determination, had become extinct. German U-boat captains experienced shock that went beyond tactics into something existential. They had gone to war viewing themselves as elite warriors, the grey wolves, destined to starve Britain through control of the sea. They faced the end as cornered prey, caught between an ocean that would no longer hide them and a homeland they could barely reach. Corvette and Capitan Peter Creamer, among the rare U-boat aces who made it through the war alive, reflected on this reversal in his later writing. We simply had no strategy to counter the hunter-killer groups. They held every advantage imaginable. Radar systems we couldn't even detect, weapons we couldn't possibly evade, intelligence sources that exposed our every decision, and most crucially, the capacity to appear anywhere, anytime. We transformed from hunters into the hunted faster than we thought possible. The price paid in human lives defied rational comprehension. Out of 40,000 submariners who set sail for combat, 30,000 never came home, representing a 75% casualty rate. Of 1,162 commissioned U-boats, 784 were destroyed. The destruction rate for boats on their initial voyage surpassed 50% by war's final months. Entire training classes from Submarine Academy were obliterated within weeks of completing their courses. American casualties, conversely, remained remarkably light. The hunter-killer groups lost just one escort carrier in Atlantic waters, USS Block Island, torpedoed in May 1944, plus fewer than 10 destroyer escorts during the whole operation. The exchange ratio that previously favored submarines by a margin of 10-1 had completely reversed, now favoring the Americans by a 20-1 advantage. Hunter-killer group innovations shaped naval combat for the coming generations. The coordination of aircraft and surface warships, leveraging intelligence to coordinate combat operations, employing mathematical analysis to perfect battle tactics, these became foundational concepts throughout modern navies. The Cold War submarine deterrent strategy was built substantially on insights gained through fighting in the Atlantic. Perhaps most significantly was the psychological transformation. The U-boat force symbolized German naval capability and technical achievement. Its elimination by American hunter-killer groups proved conclusively that manufacturing output and technical advancement would decide upcoming conflicts. Individualized heroism yielded ground to mechanized warfare. When May 1945 arrived and Germany's surrender became official, Donetsk transmitted his ultimate command to remaining submarines. Surface your boats, hoist black flags above, and navigate to designated Allied ports for surrender. 49 submarines complied with these orders, many directed by commanders in their mid-20s, staffed with youths experiencing warfare for the very first time. They yielded to hunter-killer groups, ready to annihilate them with the methodical precision that characterized the complete campaign. The ultimate patrol by an operational U-boat happened on May 7, 1945, when U-320 was sunk by British escort ships. Her commanding officer, Oberleutnant Zorza Helmut Emmerich, was just 24 years old. Together with his 36 crew members, they became the last victims of a submarine arm that had once possessed the possibility to transform the war's trajectory entirely. Analysis conducted after the fighting stopped revealed the sophisticated precision of hunter-killer operations. Search tactics were refined using statistical mathematics. Attack strategy was engineered to maximize damage probability while minimizing ammunition use. Radio intercepts were matched with tactical data to anticipate submarine movements. Everything reflected methodical improvement through careful research and battlefield lessons. The most disturbing realization for German submarine commanders was not surrendering tactical advantage, but experiencing that collapse with such tremendous speed and totality. March 1943 saw wolf packs threatening to sever Atlantic supply routes. By November 1943, U-boats faced systematic extermination, their facilities under continuous attack, their radio codes compromised, their movements foreseen and neutralized. This shift happened not from a single revolutionary technology, but from coordinated employment of multiple superiorities. Radar functioning night and day to spot submarines. Aircraft capable of patrolling hundreds of miles from their launch points for extended periods. Weapons designed to strike targets regardless of evasive maneuvers. Intelligence revealing enemy plans ahead of execution. Manufacturing capability exceeding the enemy's capacity to inflict damage. The hunter-killer groups initiated the opening chapter of contemporary naval combat, where superiority came not from individual bravery or tactical skill, but from methodical advantage spanning multiple operational areas. They converted the Atlantic into a transparent environment where every movement faced observation, every transmission faced capture, and every misstep brought annihilation. Admiral Donitz would spend the subsequent 10 years confined in Spandau prison, facing charges as a war criminal, wrestling with the annihilation of the submarine force he had constructed and commanded. His published reflections contained a significant observation. I held faith that bravery and persistence could overcome material disadvantage. The American hunter-killer groups demonstrated something different. Modern warfare rests on technology and manufacturing strength. We fell not to superior officers or sailors, but to superior organization. The influence of the hunter-killer groups transcends wartime records. They established that tomorrow's naval competition would hinge on combining aircraft and surface operations, merging intelligence gathering with tactical operations, and employing technical analysis to resolve combat challenges. The nuclear submarines emerging during the Cold War, equipped with advanced detection and strike systems, descended directly from principles demonstrated by small escort carriers and destroyer escorts in the Atlantic. Scattered across the Atlantic sea floor, more than 500 German submarines rest in steel hulls, gradually deteriorating into the deep ocean. They symbolize the frightening efficiency of American hunter-killer groups, who elevated submarine neutralization from a reactive defense into an organized campaign of relentless obliteration. The young officers commanding these doomed boats had entered the service believing they represented an elite contingent that would reshape the conflict's conclusion. They instead confronted opponents who had fundamentally reimagined warfare itself, exchanging tactical artistry for methodical annihilation. The bewilderment sparked across the U-boat fleet and subsequently throughout military history itself. The German submarine force had begun 1943 commanding the Atlantic Ocean. Wolfpacks devastated transport convoys with near-total freedom. It concluded as desperate escapees, their bases destroyed by bombing, their logistics networks demolished, their skilled personnel casualties of war, and their remaining vessels confined to harbors or pursued across the open sea. The magnitude of this reversal would echo through military annals as the threshold where technical advancement, intelligence capabilities, and industrial strength conclusively transformed maritime warfare. The American hunter-killer groups spanning 1943 through 1945 bewildered German submarine captains not through superior seamanship or gallantry, qualities readily available on either side, but through applying systematic technological and manufacturing advantage that transformed the ocean into a slaughter zone where calculation superseded heroism. The concluding statistics admitted no debate. The hunter-killer groups and supporting forces destroyed 784 German submarines. They eliminated 30,000 German submariners while sustaining fewer than 5,000 losses among their own personnel. They transformed the U-boat threat from seeming triumph to absolute destruction within roughly 24 months. This constituted far more than a tactical success. It demonstrated that warfare fundamentally had metamorphosed. The age of the solitary submarine operating covertly through concealment and cunning had concluded. Modern naval power belonged to coordinated forces leveraging sophisticated detection, weaponry, and signals intelligence through collaborative tactics. The hunter-killer groups achieved more than Atlantic dominance. They reinvented naval warfare and stunned their opponents with the scope of their conversion from the hunted into the hunters.